Every now and then you come across a build that makes you question everything. It goes against the logic, the data, the trends, and yet it just seems to work. So if you want to leave behind the questionable builds of the pro players, the typical meta builds that are just becoming boring and stale, I found 7 champions and 9 builds in high elo career from one-tricks and hardcore mains that are basically straight up out of Arkham Asylum. These are absolutely terrifying jungle builds, or simply another dimension in terms of how you can think about the champion you're playing to optimize their kit in a different way. And while I am hopefully trustworthy to you, you do need social proof. So I went into Mobalytics' new fully updated Builds 2.0 feature, brand new data, all streamlined accurately, search career, search one-tricks or hardcore mains, scroll down and went to find the juice. I also checked all their player profiles to investigate to ensure that they were actually playing this more than once, and cross-referenced the item data with Mobalytics. So I will leave a link below for you to search the sites and the builds for your own champions, one-trick Korean variants, as well as a link to all the player profiles for the champions in this video. And so my friends, let's enter the asylum. Let's start off with something a little bit humane, something you can identify with and resonate with. As with all therapy, we need to start the introductory phase before we do the deep dive. And as you can see, we have a regular kha'zix setup with a QRW evolve path. However, look at the itemization. This is the guy that goes Dark Harvest, loves his Mana Moon, he will flex a Duskblade but mostly goes Prowler's Claw, and is a historically Grandmaster and Master Player one-trick on the Korean server with this champion. He had a bit of decay but is currently doing his Master promos again, and yes, this is the build he's testing out at the moment. And what's interesting about this is you might think, well, wait a second, why don't you just go regular build? Well, basically what I did for this graphic was just change the kha'zix head from a cane head, yeah? And then added in the Lord Doms. Obviously, he will flex the Cyrildas as necessary, but I did see quite a bit of the Lord Doms. When everyone's stacking and building HP in high elo career, you are able to get that passive off quite well. That is, you do more damage to those champions with more HP than you. How cool. But you're confused about the Mana Moon, right? Yeah, of course, I would be as well if I didn't think about it or read the ability description like this guy has. Typically, you want Mana Moon on your W kha'zix evolves, you know, poking in lane, spamming that ability. But likewise on things like Kayn and kha'zix, you can always have mana issues when you're out for long periods of time. So not only do we get that exquisite passive on the Mana Moon when we fully stacked it to a Mirror Mana, but now you're questioning, well, why doesn't he go W evolve then? Why does he go R evolve second? That's because the Mirror Mana passive is basic attacks on hit against champions deal 1.5% maximum mana bonus physical damage. That means passives from his R evolve and autos. He is now allowed to reposition in fights with the R evolve to get more unseen threat passive procs off, which also synergize with the Mirror Mana. Yes, there is a 6.5 second cooldown for the same target, but if you're also getting that ability damage bonus from the Mirror Mana, you're getting the Prowler's Claw active, you can kill targets very, very quickly and then target swap to someone else. He's maximizing his positioning, he's maximizing his ability damage, he's maximizing his ability to stay on the field, and he's maximizing his mana. Try it out. Okay, then let's dive into this Vi build. I have some very heinous stuff coming up, but I need you to stick with me because if I start with the weird stuff, the psychotic Joker stuff, I feel like our relationship's gonna change. So let's just go with this now. We have here the Vi doing standard stuff, WEQ, QEW. Now you look at the build and you're like, hold up. No Conqueror? No, we're going back to the Hail of Blades, get that attack speed, get my early game going, snowball, and control. Now, I've played a lot of Vi. Vi has obviously built-in armor penetration, which means Vi is pretty good against anyone who builds armor, and also squishies because they have armor. Remember, percentage damage is great versus anyone, even squishies. That's why Void can annihilate squishies later on as well. However, mathematically, it's not always the best way to go about things, as we all know. But even though lethality can be considered terrible in certain cases, as an early game snowballing item on most champions like this, it is absolutely huge. Nocturne, Vi, Rengar, Graves, anyone can just go straight to Dirk and be like, ha ha, now you die. And that's exactly what you're meant to use it for. I love the early Ghostblade rush into Divine Sundra on Vi. Little bit of a sneak peek on another champion for later in the video. Although obviously Black Cleaver is so broken now, you might as well just do that and still kill people anyway. The reason for this particular build is totally 3 items, Hail of Blades, and the game. If you're going after this and you need, a GA, go for it. More of a Mortius maybe, Death's Dance, sure, you can go those things. But the idea is fully Serrated Dirk, Warhammer, Duskblade, get resets, Q comes off cooldown, reposition with the Q, kill people more often, more frequently, more funnily. And then you go Mortal Reminder, and the question mark you have about this is the same question mark I have about this, because couldn't we just go Black Cleaver for Armor Shred? We have built in our kit as well. Couldn't we just get like a Cyrilda's Grudge later on if we wanted to? Yeah, you could, but this player just loves Mortal Reminder second. Attack damage, 30% armor penetration, a bit of grievous wounds against the healing that might exist or probably doesn't exist, let's be honest with ourselves. This is one of those Chempunk Chain Sword feel things. Now, while I love the all-out approach of the Duskblade. I love that kind of Eclipse style gaming snowball and control. I love the Hail of Blades retrofit into just, winning the game by 23. That part I don't really understand. I can almost go with the Collector there, but obviously what you can leverage this into, if you are paying attention, is, hey, wait a second, 20% critical strike on the Mortal Reminder. We have 20% critical strike on the Collector. Couldn't I just IE now? In theory, you could, and maybe that's where we're going if the game goes on. IE plus a GA, go and extrapolate and test, but overall, I like the build, minus the Mortal Reminder. Collector, obviously a little bit of a bait, but a Korean favorite. This isn't a good objective mathematical build, but this player has reached Master Plus in Korea, and is the only Vi who doesn't stick to Divine Sundra as the core mythic. Okay, look at this psychosis we have right now. Here we have a Shaco build, and most of you going, which hybridization? Wait a second, what in the hell? Exactly right. Yes, he does go EQW max, he loves his 2 shift, but he does put 2 points into the boxes just for context. It's usually around level 4 that he does that though after his first clear. But now you have questions. Yes, well, lethal tempo is a common thread in this video. They do love the attack range, the attack speed, and it obviously amps up when you want to go less than optimal builds, but it's also great for builds where you're giving yourself certain levels of AD ratios so those attack speeds can kind of, amp up a little bit. And of course, Shaco says, well, I've got these kind of, slows in my kit. Couldn't I just use approach velocity and then, do more damage? At least that does seem to be the question he asked himself in the mirror before he decided, yes, that sounds logical. And then he realized that much like old school Evelyn, where you were just sort of, hey, look, I'm an assassin, but why don't I just build like Blade of the Rune King and tank and just engage in the backline? Then I don't have to be an assassin to reposition. I can just live. And that's his concept here. He basically wants to take 2 of the best item combos in the game, something I run on Mundo, something I love on many champions like Sion as well, Titanic and Heartsteel. Why? Because they infinitely scale. The more stacking I get from the Heartsteel, the more AD gets converted into the Titanic Hydra, which means I'm just getting stronger and stronger, and Shaco is someone who can use AD ratios. Obviously, we all know this. Additionally, again, when you have attack speed procs, all of those AD ratios get converted to each auto, so that's kind of useful when you're a tank who just wants to thrive and survive. And on top of that, he threw in the Stone Plate just to help because guess what? That item is super strong. Many tanks don't build it, but you should. This is basically, hey, I don't want to do as much damage as normal, but I'm really tired of Shaco not being so good in the mid and the late game teamfights. I don't really like split pushing. Why don't I just force the issue with this? And that's effectively the pretense, but the Heartsteel Titanic, the Titanic, the lethal tempo, those 3 things together really are the thing that you can kind of apply to many champions. He just chose to apply it to himself, which I'm sure he would do with his clone. Next up, I have for you Rengar. Now, obviously everybody knows in Korea, yeah, they like to go the QWE Rengar builds. Yes, they do, my friends. However, I found some Rengars who basically said, hey, that Vi build you were mentioning, I kind of like the idea of that. Why don't I, rush the Sheen for the on-hit? That's kind of nice, right? And then I can basically go into Divine Sundra to give me some of that percentage damage, the healing, the hyper penetration. Of course, I only want the one kind of penetration, but I'll take it. And that's because Korea loves these team fighting style builds. They've always enjoyed the things that do well in pro play and high elo in terms of tight-knit, closer fights, skirmishes, surviving and healing, longer drawn-out fights, which of course Rengar loves. But if you're an assassin, that cannot always be conducive to success. So he basically goes for the Divine Sundra rush, then he decides, you know what, I want to scale with some AD ratio, so he goes for the Ravenous Hydra still, and then he will flex into the Ghost Blade for more utility access. And of course, the rated Dirk and, lethality. Now this is a very hardcore top lane player who also plays jungle, but he takes his build into the jungle when he does do so. And for me, that's very, very interesting because top lane Rengars have different philosophies and playstyles than jungle Rengars, at least on the Western servers. The Korean server here, it's mighty different in terms of how they play jungle. They like that beefy fighter mythic and then flexing into more damage-oriented builds. For example, we also have this other Rengar who's more GM challenger, both these guys are. And he swaps out that Conqueror for the fleet footwork in order to have, that HP while clearing, which you don't really need, but he likes it. But it's also good for elongated skirmishes and repositioning, getting you back into a bush faster. But instead of Divine Sundra from his perspective, he likes to go the Gore Drinker to amp up his clear speed as well with the Iron Spike Whip to give him some of that Omnivamp in the fight. And instead of the Ravenous Hydra Ghostblade for his damage items, a squishy build if you like, he goes for the Essence Reaver, which we all know, plus the Edge of Night. So as you can see, there's a much more hybrid damage fighter kind of style that these Rengars like to use. Very, very different than anything we see on the Western servers at the moment or for a long time. And still not the same as, your chem tank, fully tank Rengar from Season 11. They still do damage, albeit less, but they're really designed to get into these fights. They really want to bait and force people onto them and reposition with jumps because they can survive, they can move faster, they can heal, they can sustain, they can tank more. A similar logic to the Shaco build, but definitely a bit more normalized, I think. We can recognize this and go, okay, I see it. Yeah, the last build on this list is truly cursed. Just wait. Okay, just very briefly, I wanted to give you a normal-ish kind of build, except to take Nocturne. He has a standard build max, nothing is weird about that, but he rushes the Axiom Arc. Then he goes into the Stride Breaker, and then he likes to go Black Cleaver, but also flexes that Sterix Gauge. This is obviously great when you want to go a more bursty itemization component in the first two, and then you want to all-in people, you know, on loop. You need survivability because, of course, there are many things you can go on Nocturne and really guard and shop it around. There are some more crazy builds from One Tricks in my own Discord server than I've ever seen in my life. But of course, in a lot of Elos, anything can work, and this is, of course, high Elo. So you don't go full-on Assassin, but the Axiom Arc is doing super well on Nocturne because they buffed out lethality from 12 to 18 recently. This is something that helps a lot when you want a damage profile. The Stride Breaker we all know, the stickiness, the slow, and of course the Sterix and the Black Cleaver we all know. But again, the common thread is let me snowball with something like the Axiom Arc, build up a bit of resistance base or survivability, and now I do more damage than you can deal with, and you can't kill me. Win-win for me. Let me put it this way, this next champion is Udyr, and we have two funny ones for you, basically normal stuff, but at the same time, I had to make two new itemization icons for these build graphics. The last one's coming up, but from the Udyr here, we have two flexations. We have Lethal Temper, Prowess, Cool Black Cleaver, Collector. Yes, he still goes Q, then he goes E, then he goes R, all the way at the end. He does not fall clear all the time. He does not play like a logical person. He plays like, well, he's not Udyr. He plays like he's basically a Rek'Sai almost. Again, the approach velocity is something that's so funny. I did not expect in this theme of video to see Lethal Tempo so much, nor to see so much approach velocity on Notamundo. But it does kind of make sense because you have the slow in your Phoenix, which means you can stick to them and kill them more, I guess, although you should be one-shotting people anyway. They did nerf it. It's not as good as it was, but he's basically saying, look, Black Cleaver is so damn broken. Armor Shred, stickiness, HP haste, AD, why don't I just do that? And the second item, as you're now looking at on your screen, is the Gore Drinker. He'll go Conqueror for this. This will obviously be better into melee comps that he can actually get onto. He doesn't need the Prowler's Claw to access the backline of highly mobile comms. They're not going to die from a lethality proc because of the nerfs to the Qmax Udyr builds. I mean, they will, but basically when you've got a really beefy comp, he'll go the Gore Drinker, he'll forsake the Lethal Tempo, he'll go into the Conqueror, and because he's going for a more typical fighter itemization build, he will go for the Drain Tank Blade of the Ruin King. With this, he's able to amplify his DPS, he's obviously got the Conqueror stacking and healing, and he has the Omnivent from the Gore Drinker, which is of course something that people enjoy on these champions, like Lee Sin, who basically only builds that. And the reason why I chose these builds from these champions is because when you look at all the data on the new site for Mobalytics, and you look at all the data across all the other websites, you see, okay, look, these champions typically build this. This has the best win rate data. This is what everybody else does on the main and the meta and the pros. And then you look at this guy doing Arkham Asylum jungling in the corner, who's in the same Elo games, you're like, how do you even make that work? And these are the logical, you know, descriptions of how they came up with the builds and why they might use them, but then they fuse it with their own playstyle. That's the important thing. You've got to fuse the build, the logic with your playstyle, and your ability to actually, you know, execute it. To that point, the final one on this list has upset me greatly. We have a Warwick. He does his normal stuff. That looks absolutely fine to me. QWE, you've got your WQE max. That's normal. Oh my god. Even Shroud. I had to make an Even Shroud icon. Now, obviously, you have Vi building this as well with similar builds, which is concerning. Volibear has done this in the past. Warwick in high elo Korea, there's not a lot of them anyway. This guy likes to go with Even Shroud. Hey, look, if I'm going to engage and CC everybody and then just, you know, either blow up or die, why don't I just create the amp damage? Why don't I just get some resistances? I'll still go Titanic first. I've put it there just so you can see the Even Shroud explicitly, but he still rushes Titanic. He goes Lethal Temper for all the benefits that it gives a Warwick player. We all know that. And he forsakes the things like PTA by basically saying, look, I'll do the damage myself. I'll get the Titanic myself. I'll win lanes. I'll take names. I'll abuse everybody. And then I'm gonna go Even Shroud. And of course, when I struggle to get into the backline to activate my Even Shroud, I will get Dead Man's Plate so that I can run faster at them to activate my Even Shroud, which of course will give bonus damage amp to my team, assuming they can follow me. Remember, low elo players, I talk about this in my silver course. Actually, I talk about this in all my courses that I've released so far, which is everyone except for Diamond. You've got to look where your team is when you engage. You've got to know when to target swap and to peel. So basically, you can use this as a disengage tool, bit of tankiness, it's cheap, it's affordable, and it obviously gives you resistances as a bonus. So Warwick doesn't really need resistances because he has effectively built in on his E. However, the idea is, hey, look, I have a lot of HP for my Titanic. I can build HP itemization afterwards and effectively focus on just disrupting, CCing, healing, damage amping. I want to make it clear we are not maxing E for any stretch of the imagination. We are simply buying the Even Shroud to give us this tankiness and this engage tool. Is it better than your standard builds? No, 100% not. But this is how he likes to play. Again, the same theme of this in Korean high elo. He knows he can snowball and do damage with Titanic, then have a few skirmishes and team fights, Amplified for the lanes he's got ahead, survive as necessary, and then become a bit of a meat shield later on. I tried to make it sound good, I hope I didn't make it sound too good. Basically a shit covered in frosting at this point, but hey, but there you have it, some of the best one-trick / main unique builds from Korea that you can use, all high elo based. You can go ahead and scout on Mobalytics the one-trick builds and the main builds for your own champions if you like. And if you want to understand how to play jungle, no matter what kind of crazy ass nonsense you're coming up with, click the video in the box in your top right for the answer.